Most people know what happened in Hiroshima. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Approximately 70,000 people died in the immediate blast. The event is documented, memorialized, and taught in schools across the world. In February 1945, 6 months earlier, Japanese forces killed an estimated 100,000 civilians in Manila, the capital of the Philippines. It took 1 month. No atomic bomb. No industrial weapon of mass destruction. Soldiers with conventional weapons, killing the civilians of a city they were losing, systematically in hospitals, in churches, in the streets, in the final weeks of a war they knew they had already lost. The Manila Massacre is not taught in most schools. It does not have a memorial that the world visits. Most people who were not Filipino have never heard of it. This is the story of what happened in Manila in February 1945, and of why 80 years later, it remains one of the least known atrocities of the Second World War. Manila in 1945 was one of the great cities of Asia. It had been the capital of the Philippines since the Spanish colonial period, a city with 4 centuries of accumulated history, architecture, and culture. Its historic core, Intramuros, the walled city built by Spanish colonizers in the 16th century, contained churches, convents, government buildings, and residential neighborhoods that represented some of the oldest European-influenced architecture in Southeast Asia. Beyond Intramuros, Manila had grown into a modern metropolis. Universities, hospitals, hotels, commercial districts, and residential neighborhoods that housed a population of approximately 800,000 people. It was called the Pearl of the Orient. By January 1945, it was also a city about to become a battlefield. American forces under General Douglas MacArthur had landed in the Philippines in October 1944, fulfilling his famous promise to return. The Japanese position in the Philippines was deteriorating rapidly. By late January 1945, American forces were advancing toward Manila from the north and south. The Japanese commander in the Philippines, General Tomoyuki Yamashita, made a decision that historians have analyzed extensively in the decades since. Recognizing that Manila could not be held, he ordered his forces to withdraw from the city, to avoid the kind of urban battle that would destroy it. Not all Japanese commanders in Manila followed that order. Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi, commanding approximately 20,000 Japanese naval and army forces within the city, chose to fight. What followed was not primarily a military engagement. It was a massacre. If you're new here, this is the place for you. Subscribe to Unsolved East and hit like. We bring you Asia's forgotten stories every week. It only takes a second but helps us grow. The Battle of Manila began on February 3, 1945, when American forces entered the city's northern districts. What Japanese forces under Iwabuchi did as the battle progressed was documented by American military investigators, Filipino survivors, and journalists who entered the city in its aftermath. The documentation is extensive. The pattern it reveals is consistent and unambiguous. Japanese forces systematically killed Filipino civilians, not as collateral damage in a military engagement, not in isolated incidents of individual soldiers acting without orders. Systematically, in organized operations in specific locations against people who posed no military threat. The killings occurred in hospitals. Japanese forces entered the Philippine General Hospital, the largest medical facility in the country, and killed patients in their beds. They moved through wards. They killed the sick, the injured, the immobile. Medical staff who attempted to intervene were killed alongside their patients. The killings occurred in churches. Filipino civilians who had sought refuge in the churches of Intramuros, believing, as civilians across history have believed, that a place of worship offered some protection, were killed inside those buildings. The De La Salle College massacre killed over 40 civilians, including members of the De La Salle Brothers religious community, in a single incident. The killings occurred in residential areas. Families in their homes. People in the streets. women and children in the specific circumstances that the historical record documents with a specificity that is difficult to read. The sexual violence was systematic. Filipino women were subjected to rape on a scale that survivor testimony and subsequent investigation documented extensively, a pattern that mirrored what had occurred in Nanjing 7 years earlier, carried out by forces of the same military in similar circumstances of urban defeat. Buildings were systematically burned. The historic structures of intramuros, churches, convents, government buildings that had stood for 4 centuries, were destroyed. The Rizal Library, one of the finest collections in Southeast Asia, was burned. The Manila Cathedral was burned. The San Agustin Church, which had survived the Spanish colonial period, earthquakes, and previous wars, was damaged but survived, one of the few structures in intramuros that did. The battle lasted until March 3, 1945. When it was over, an estimated 100,000 Filipino civilians were dead. Manila, the Pearl of the Orient, was the second most destroyed Allied capital of World War II after Warsaw. The perpetrators? Rear Admiral Iwabuchi died during the battle. The circumstances disputed, some accounts suggesting suicide, others combat death. He never faced a war crimes tribunal. General Yamashita, who had ordered the withdrawal from Manila and whose orders Iwabuchi had defied, was tried by an American military tribunal after the war for the actions of forces under his command in the Philippines. He was convicted and executed in 1946. The legal principle established by the Yamashita trial, that a commander can be held responsible for the actions of forces under their command even without direct orders, became known as the Yamashita Standard and has influenced international military law ever since. The men who carried out the killings in Manila's hospitals, churches, and residential neighborhoods were largely never individually prosecuted. The Manila Massacre is not well known outside the Philippines. The reasons for this are not complicated, but they are worth stating clearly. The post-war settlement in Asia was shaped by American strategic interests in a way that deprioritized Japanese accountability for crimes committed in territories that were not American. Japan's rapid transformation into a Cold War ally meant that extensive war crimes prosecution was not in American strategic interest. The Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal prosecuted a significant number of Japanese leaders, but the specific perpetrators of the Manila killings, below the level of command, were largely not pursued. The Philippines itself was a newly independent nation emerging from colonial rule, with limited international diplomatic leverage to press for the kind of sustained attention that might have kept Manila's story in the global consciousness. And the Cold War restructured the entire framework within which the Pacific War was remembered in Western consciousness. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the American actions that ended the war, became the defining moral narrative of the Pacific theater. Japan's victimhood in those events was real and significant. But the narrative that centered Japanese victimhood in the Pacific War created, as a structural consequence, less space for Japanese perpetration. Filipino civilians killed by Japanese forces in Manila do not fit easily into a narrative centered on the atomic bombings. So they were placed elsewhere. In the Philippines, the Manila Massacre is remembered. February 2025 marked the 80th anniversary, and Filipino media covered it extensively. Survivors and their descendants have maintained the memory in ways that community memory maintains what institutional history neglects. But outside the Philippines, in Japan, in the United States, in the international community that shapes how the Second World War is taught and remembered, Manila remains a gap. Japan has never formally apologized for the Manila Massacre. The Philippine government has repeatedly requested one. It has not been given. Manila rebuilt. It took decades. The historic structures of intramuros that were destroyed in February 1945 cannot be fully restored. The centuries of accumulated architecture, the libraries and their contents, the specific human texture of a city that had developed over 400 years cannot be reconstructed from rubble. What stands in intramuros today is partly restored, partly reconstructed, and partly the honest acknowledgement that some things once destroyed are simply gone. The San Agustin Church, which survived the battle and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, stands as it has stood since the 16th century. Mass is still celebrated there. Tourists visit. Filipinos are married there as they have been for generations. The city around it has grown into one of Southeast Asia's largest metropolitan areas, a megacity of over 13 million people in the greater Manila area, built on and around the geography of what was destroyed in 1945. The survivors of the Manila Massacre are almost gone. The youngest people who have conscious memories of February 1945 are in their late 80s and 90s. Their testimony, collected by Filipino historians, journalists, and researchers over the decades, exists in archives and in the specific memory of families who were told what happened by people who were there. When those people are gone, the memory will depend entirely on the historical record and on the willingness of the institutions that shape how history is taught, in Japan, in the Philippines, in the United States, in the international community, to include Manila in what they choose to remember. So far, that willingness has been uneven. Japan has not apologized. 100,000 people were killed in 1 month, in a city that was called the Pearl of the Orient, by forces that knew the war was already lost.